Hello Merfolk fans, my name is Joe. Thank you for tuning into my channel today. As always, if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe and share any comments you might have. For the past 2 months, I've been testing a relatively new land card from Oath of the Gatewatch called Sea Gate Wreckage in my Modern Merfolk deck. On its face, this card seems very appealing for its rare and powerful ability to draw multiple cards. However, being only able to produce colorless mana in a deck with so many double blue spells could prove to be a real drawback. This video will explain in detail my observations on Sea Gate Wreckage's performance across dozens of matches, playing against the entire spectrum of the modern metagame. Can it live up to the hype and be a viable engine for card advantage? Or will its inability to produce blue mana drag the deck down? To begin, I'd like to talk about the absolute foundation of Modern Merfolk, its mana base. As one of the most competitive decks in the modern format, recently shifting back and forth between Tier 1 and Tier 2, Merfolk is played by thousands of skilled pilots and frequently puts up impressive results in tournaments around the world. With all of this collective experience, the community of Merfolk players has more or less perfected the deck's mana base. 19 has been unanimously agreed upon as the minimum number of lands required for the deck to perform optimally, and many players have piloted lists with exactly 19 lands, to great tournament results. However, Merfolk lists that run this minimal number of lands rely heavily on AEther Vial and often choose to cut one or more copies of Master of Waves, arguably the most powerful creature in all of Modern Merfolk, because his casting cost of 4 can be difficult to pay while only running 19 lands. In order to reduce dependence on AEther Vial and comfortably allow a full playset of Master of Waves in the deck, many Merfolk pilots have opted to run 20 rather than 19 lands. There is a remarkable level of agreement among the modern Merfolk community that the optimal number of lands for the deck exists precisely somewhere between 19 and 20, no less and no more. There have been many strong tournament results by players running 19 lands, but just as many by players running 20 lands. If we look at 2 different Merfolk deck lists that recently put up good tournament results, first here at a list with 19 lands, and second at a list with 20 lands, we can see that the mana bases are extremely similar, with the biggest difference simply being the overall quantity of lands. In this case, the deck with 20 lands contains 1 more Wanderwine Hub than the deck with 19 lands. The only other tiny difference is that one pilot chose to play a second Cavern of Souls in place of the 9th island from the other deck. With tournament results being as balanced as they have been between 19 and 20 lands, there's a great deal of debate in the community over exactly what is the optimal card for this 20th spot in the deck. For those in the camp that feel 19 lands is optimal, they prefer to squeeze in an extra creature such as Phantasmal Image, or an extra interactive spell such as Vapor Snag or Spell Pierce into this slot. For those in the camp that feel 20 lands is optimal, there's no agreement on whether simply running an extra island is best, or perhaps a Cavern of Souls to help fight against control decks, or perhaps a Ghost Quarter or Tectonic Edge to combat man lands or other powerful utility lands. With this debate in mind, I developed a hypothesis for my testing of Sea Gate Wreckage as follows. With tournament results proving 19 lands adequate to succeed in a highly competitive environment, and with my personal experience playing thousands of games making me lean heavily towards playing 20 lands in order to allow the deck to hit its curve more consistently and rely a bit less on AEther Vial, then Sea Gate Wreckage should be a great choice as a singleton in the 20th land slot, providing mana for higher casting cost creatures such as Merrow Reejerey and Master of Waves, while also providing access to its immensely powerful card drawing ability. With access to 6 other colorless sources in the deck between 4 Mutavaults and 2 Cavern of Souls, I predicted that by the time I wanted to activate Sea Gate Wreckage's card draw ability, I would virtually always have access to one of these other lands for its colorless mana requirement. So with that hypothesis laid out, let's take a closer look at the card itself. Sea Gate Wreckage has 2 modes: tap to produce a single colorless mana, or pay 3 mana and tap to draw a card. There are reasonable analogs for both of these modes. The analog for the first mode is a Basic Wastes, an entirely underwhelming card by any measure. The analog for the second mode is Library of Alexandria, though in reverse, one of the most powerful lands ever printed. So the performance spectrum can range from terrible on one hand to utterly broken on the other. I knew I would need to play many games to accurately determine whether the card was a dud or an all-star. While playing, I developed a matrix with negative, neutral, and positive grades to describe the card's performance in each game. This matrix is as follows. A grade of 0 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was bad. In such a game, I would have preferred to draw any spell over my 20th land, as Sea Gate Wreckage was not useful at all, neither for mana nor for its card draw ability. Here is an example of a game in which Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was graded as a 0. I already had tons of mana available, and with a Negate stuck in my hand, it was literally impossible for me to play all my cards and activate Sea Gate Wreckage's card drawing ability. My mono-blue Tron opponent was clocking me with a Silent Arbiter equipped with Batterskull, gaining 5 life every turn. I really needed to start hitting the opponent's life total, but I needed to top deck a Hurkyl's Recall or a Merrow Reejerey to combo with Harbinger of the Tides, to get the Silent Arbiter off the battlefield for a turn or two. This game was an excellent example of how Sea Gate Wreckage can create a frustrating conflict with counterspells in post-sideboarded games. A grade of 1 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was poor. This grade is very similar to a grade of 0, with the major difference being that Sea Gate Wreckage provided some minimal utility with its colorless mana. A grade of 2 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was average. In such a game, Sea Gate Wreckage's colorless mana provided some decent opportunities to play spells and develop my position. Here is an example of a game in which Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was graded as a 2. The colorless mana gives me access to play either Silvergill Adept or Spreading Seas on my second turn, either of which could continue to draw me into more lands and allow me to develop my position. However, I happened to draw an extremely awkward AEther Vial turn 2, and had to play the Vial as a hedge against possibly not drawing any further lands. It's important to note here that Sea Gate Wreckage, as my 20th land, would have been more effective in this game as a blue source, expanding my options to include casting Master of the Pearl Trident, Tidebinder Mage, or Harbinger of the Tides. A grade of 3 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was neutral. In such a game, I won before Sea Gate Wreckage had a chance to play a role, with the game typically ending with the land still in my hand. In this kind of a situation, it would not have made any difference if Sea Gate Wreckage as the 20th land in the deck had been a different land or any spell. The game was over and won already. Note that similar situations in which I lose are not at all the same, and would receive a worse grade than neutral. In a loss, there's the possibility that Sea Gate Wreckage could instead have been a top-decked spell that may have changed the defeat into a victory. Moving on, a grade of 4 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was good. In such a game, Sea Gate Wreckage's colorless mana was actively beneficial, allowing me to cast spells with perfect efficiency. Here is an example of a game in which Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was graded as a 4. I'm playing against a blue-red Eldrazi opponent who plays Lightning Bolts and Dismembers, so getting Kira Great Glass Spinner onto the battlefield is a priority. Sea Gate Wreckage gives me access to a 3rd mana to play Kira, while leaving 2 blue lands to play Harbinger of the Tides, bouncing the opponent's Reality Smasher. Note here that any land that enters the battlefield untapped and provides any type of mana would receive a grade of 4 in such a position. A grade of 4 is primarily a sign that playing a 20th land is correct. A grade of 5 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was great. In such a game, I got to activate its card drawing ability exactly once, justifying its inclusion in the deck. And a grade of 6 means Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was excellent. In such a game, I had access to multiple activations of Sea Gate Wreckage, more than justifying its inclusion in the deck. Here is an example of a game in which Sea Gate Wreckage's performance was graded as a 6. My opponent is playing a Mardu Tokens deck. I untapped with an empty hand and 2 AEther Vials. I proceeded to draw into a Master of Waves, which I vialed in, then activated Sea Gate Wreckage, drawing into a Silvergill Adept, which I was also able to vial in. The Silvergill drew into another Master of Waves, which I vialed in next turn, and, with an empty hand, could activate Sea Gate Wreckage again to draw another card. If every game were like this one, Sea Gate Wreckage would be the best card in the deck, hands down. For a sample size, I decided to play 100 games against random opponents on Cockatrice. Only full games counted. I discarded any data from games where the opponent quit early for whatever reason. In 100 games, I drew Sea Gate Wreckage exactly 30 times. In these 30 games, Sea Gate Wreckage performed as follows. 1 game bad, 2 games poor, 7 games average, 3 games neutral, 11 games good, 2 games great, and 4 games excellent. Of the 10 games in which Sea Gate Wreckage received a grade of bad, poor, or average, I lost 6, or exactly 60%, which indicates that a negatively performing Sea Gate Wreckage can contribute to my overall loss rate. It's also worth noting, however, that even with these 6 game losses, I only lost 2 matches with Sea Gate Wreckage performing poorly, which indicates that the overall power level of the deck as a whole can offset a poor performance by any individual card. Of the 17 games in which Sea Gate Wreckage received a grade of good, great, or excellent, I won 10, or approximately 59%, exactly mirroring the loss rate while performing poorly. While this number indicates that a positively performing Sea Gate Wreckage can contribute to my overall win rate, I had hoped that it would have contributed more substantially. Given these results, my general observations are as follows. First, Sea Gate Wreckage was only activated in 6% of games. This was substantially less than I had hoped for at the outset of the experiment. Second, winning only 10 of the 17 games in which Sea Gate Wreckage performed well is an unimpressive statistic. I would expect a card with as high a ceiling for potential upside to contribute to victories far more often when it performs well. Third, and perhaps most interesting of all, I discovered along the way that this performance analysis was not simply a study of Sea Gate Wreckage, but rather an examination of the role of the 20th spot in the deck. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there's much debate over what card can be most effective in this spot, with camps divided first on whether it should be a 20th land or an extra spell, and then divided further on exactly which land or spell should fill the spot. With Sea Gate Wreckage as a singleton in my deck, it naturally isolated itself very neatly for examination in every game. I can see in any given situation whether this precise spot in the deck was necessary as a land in order to play my spells efficiently, and if it performed adequately as a colorless source or would have been better as a blue source. Looking at my data, there were 7 games with a grade of 2, or average, in which I drew and played Sea Gate Wreckage, where it would have been more productive as an island or other blue source, but still did some work as a basic wastes. There were also 11 games with a grade of 4, or good, where the Sea Gate Wreckage performed admirably as a basic wastes, allowing me to cast my spells with perfect efficiency. In these 18 games, Sea Gate Wreckage, acting as a basic wastes, was beneficial to the deck's operation. Among the 30 games in which I drew Sea Gate Wreckage, there were only 3 games, with a grade of 0 or 1, in which it was a redundant land that would have performed much better as any spell rather than a 20th land. It is important to note, however, that in 3 of the 6 games where Sea Gate Wreckage received an impressive grade of 5 or 6 by drawing me cards, it would have been a redundant late-game land had it been an island or Cavern of Souls rather than a Sea Gate Wreckage, and thus would have been better as a top-decked spell rather than a 20th land. Looked at in the larger context of the 100 games in which I collected data, this means that having a 20th land in the deck was detrimental in at most 6% of total games, beneficial in at least 21% of total games, and of no effect in the 73% of games in which the 20th land was not drawn or was neutral. Given these observations, my conclusions were as follows. First, with its card drawing ability being activated in only 6% of games, I can conclusively say that in Modern Merfolk, Sea Gate Wreckage is much closer to a basic wastes than to Library of Alexandria. Too close, in fact, for comfort. I will be replacing Sea Gate Wreckage in my deck for another card, just as I would replace a basic wastes. Second, after playing 100 games with Sea Gate Wreckage as the 20th land, I can conclusively say that with this specific list, 20 lands performs far better than 19 lands. My data shows that the 20th land was beneficial in at least 21% of total games, and only detrimental in, at most, 6% of total games. Moving forward, I will need to choose a replacement for Sea Gate Wreckage in the 20th land slot in the deck. One important thing to note, again, is that there were 7 games in which Sea Gate Wreckage received a grade of 2, where I would have preferred to have access to blue mana. For this reason, Ghost Quarter and Tectonic Edges will not be acceptable replacements for the Sea Gate Wreckage, as they only provide colorless mana. For further help choosing a replacement, we can look to a great chart published a couple days ago by Reddit user Elvish Visionary. It documents the distribution of top 8 decks in last weekend's SCG States tournaments, with 379 total decks represented. We can see on the chart that Merfolk is already beginning to stake its claim in the new meta, with a solid 15 pilots taking the deck to top 8 or better finishes. Looking at the rest of the chart, something that jumps out at me is the prevalence of control decks and tempo decks. Among the 8 decks highlighted on this chart, and all the rest of the decks putting up top 8 results, There were approximately 80 decks featuring counterspells, or roughly 21% of total decks represented in this past weekend's top 8s. With counterspells seemingly returning to vogue, I will be swapping out the Sea Gate Wreckage for a third Cavern of Souls in my 20th land spot for the coming weeks, and possibly beyond. I've taken quite the journey with Sea Gate Wreckage over these past 2 months, and it saddens me to discover that my data shows it does not perform well enough to warrant inclusion in Modern Merfolk. Drawing cards is, for me, one of the most fun and satisfying things in Magic, as well as one of the most powerful. For now, I'll have to be happy with Silvergill Adept and Spreading Seas as my card drawing spells, as Sea Gate Wreckage will be returning to my trade binder. My name is Joe, and thank you all again for tuning into my channel today. As always, if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe and leave a comment if you have any thoughts to share. Have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next video.